A very impassioned speech from a Russian President Vladimir Putin on the 2022 Victory Day celebration there at Moscow's Red Square. But while that speech was going on, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg used the Victory Day to call on Russia's leader to end the war in Ukraine immediately. He told a German newspaper Der Welt that President Vladimir Putin should pull his troops back from Ukraine and start peace negotiations. Mr. Stoltenberg says the Russian president has regularly used his 9th May address to spread falsehood about the West and criticized NATO. He has rejected Russia's claims that NATO had acted aggressively, insisting that it's a defensive alliance built to secure peace and uphold the values of freedom and democracy. Let's talk to Nigeria's former ambassador to Ukraine, Frank Isoh, who joins us from our Abuja studio. I almost got myself caught on that. Ambassador, good morning. Thank you for your time. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning, laddie. It's my pleasure to be here once again.
We took quite a bit of the Russian president's speech there because a significant part of it was devoted to, again, trying to rationalize, explain the reason behind his country's action in Ukraine, even though there were other parts of it where he hearkened back to the then Soviet Union's victory in World War II. Listening to him there, do you get a sense that he's digging in, or is there a kind of shift in emphasis and an attempt to actually justify this to those listening to him around the world?
Well, my perception of that speech is that he's trying to dig in. He's not likely to retreat anytime soon, and the reason is quite obvious. What he set out to achieve, he's not been able to achieve. The thrust to Kyiv was a great failure, and he arranged the troops and sent them to Donbass. And the essence was to try and capture the whole of Donbass. Because at the onset of the war, the rebels in Donetsk and Luhansk were controlling just a third of those two territories. And they needed to capture the entire territories of Donbass. And the progress has been very, very slow. And it doesn't appear as if it's going to make a lot of progress in that direction. So the essence of this speech now, trying to exhort his people, telling them they are fighting for their homeland, it's not something that is likely to resonate in Ukraine. It's difficult for anybody to accept the fact that going into Donbass is because they're trying to save Russians who are living there. The ethnic Russians, but that doesn't mean they are Russian citizens. Just like you have ethnic Ukrainians in Russia who are Russian citizens. I think that distinction has to be made clear. But I believe he wants to dig in, and my sense is that the more he tries to dig in, the more he's likely to get stuck in that region. There isn't much progress made so far, by his troops.
Before this morning, there was a lot of speculation. There were all kinds of rumors about what he was going to use today to do and say. Traditionally in the past, May 9th, 1945, in Russia was used to unveil new military hardware, new weapons, new fighting groups, and all of that. But this year, not much of that was seen, in spite of all the speculation. We also had heard that he was going to declare victory of some sort. But given your answer to the last question, he hasn't been quite able to do that.
Well, there's nothing to cheer about, about Russian intervention so far. I think the intelligence committee in Russia got everything wrong. I think they must have used old data from 2014 when they invaded Crimea and seized it effortlessly, so to speak. I think based on that, they thought it was going to be a walkover going in this time. They did not reckon with the kind of support that is streaming in from the West, nor the training Ukrainian soldiers have received since 2014. And what they've seen on the battlefield so far, after about 2.5 months, that it's not going to be a picnic. And in that respect, he's having difficulty convincing his people that his country is making progress in this war. Now, I read somewhere, I don't know how true that is trying to recall some 60,000 soldiers from Syria to get to Donbass. If that story is anything to go by, it raises 3 issues. number one, that there has been a depletion of forces among his soldiers in the Donbass area. Secondly, that is looking for fairly experienced troops, since the troops have been fighting ISIL and the other terrorist groups, so to speak, in Syria. He's looking for people with that kind of experience. And thirdly, it would appear too that it's getting to a stage where he might depend on conscripts. And these people don't have the kind of experience he needs to get the kind of victory he wants in the Donbass region. And I believe if so far the troops that are in Donbass, who greatly outnumber the Ukrainians, have not been able to make sufficient success, I don't see what difference these troops is going to bring from Syria will make. So he's in for a very long haul. And I think it's a fiasco, if you ask me. It's beginning to show. And I want to believe, that towards the end of the year, when the sanctions start biting very hard, the capacity to continue on this scale will be greatly diminished, in my view.
One thing that seemed to have surprised a lot of people was the fact that in Mariupol, which had been the center of a great deal of attention, and I'm using that to talk about what is on ground in Ukraine itself, there are talks about the Ukrainians themselves now mounting counteroffensives. But at the same time, when the Russians decided not to storm the steel plant, the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, it came as a bit of a surprise. And then over the weekend, we were made to understand that all the civilians, children, elderly, women, and so on, were allowed passage out of that steel plant. Do you think, looking at the situation more broadly, there is a shift in emphasis also on the ground, even from the Ukrainian side as well, given what is going on?
Yeah, to start with, I think the weapons streaming in from the West are beginning to make a difference. Now, the thinking was that if those civilians were evacuated from Mariupol, that the Russians would just storm the place. But then he didn't do that. That's Putin himself. And the reason is very obvious. The people defending the city are more or less, how do I put it now, quote unquote, suicidal. They've given up on life. They've decided they are going to die fighting to protect that city. And for somebody who has decided to die as it were, he can't go down alone. He's likely to go down with a lot of people from the opposing side. And the Russians are very wary that if they storm the place, they might lose so many soldiers. So it is likely the emphasis now is to continue the siege, hoping that sometime in the future, maybe a few weeks or in a month's time, they'll be able to overwhelm the defenders. But I don't see that happening, because there must be a corridor through which those soldiers are still getting weapons, even though the place is almost devastated, as it were.
I know the last time I spoke to you and we talked about peace talks, you, as it's turning out, rather presently suggested that peace talks were off the table until it appeared as if some equilibrium was established. I remember that word you used, equilibrium on both sides. Is there more of an equilibrium now? And do you, in your view, think perhaps if someone, a third party, were to attempt to introduce some level of peace talks, both sides might be more amenable today?
Well, it is not likely. Even if there were any talk of peace engagement, it's not likely Russia will accept that, because Russia has nothing to tell its people right now. And then the essence of going to the war will be questioned. But there's no achievement on ground. All they have are just body bags being sent back to Moscow. And the position of the leader will become very, very shaky if all he has to tell the people is that he has decided to make peace. Here is a man who refused all entreaties before going into Ukraine, because he was so sure that he was going to overrun Ukraine in a matter of weeks. And since that hasn't happened, I mean, where is he going to have the shame, to want to pull out? It's not likely he will do that. And the equilibrium I talked about last time is gradually being established. because I believe Ukrainians are becoming more confident in defending their territory, and they'll keep getting stronger as the days go by. So I think Russia miscalculated in this venture. And like I said last time, the West wants Russia to be sufficiently bled in this war. So there's no way we're going to talk about peace now. That was why, the visit of the Secretary General of the UN to Moscow didn't elicit much from the Russians. Because there's nothing, to tell their people why they are suspending the war. And the way things are, it's a long haul, for Russia in Ukraine.
That's a dire prediction, and I wouldn't bet against it because you have proved right in the past. Thank you so much, Ambassador Frank Isoh, for your perspective this morning and for your time.
It's been my pleasure, Lade. Thank you very much.
After the break, Fiji pauses U.S. seizure of Russia-linked super yacht. Please join us again.